All right, we will go ahead and get started. Good morning. Welcome to Morning School Gardening Club. This is a time for us to meet once a month to talk through some practical and timely things you might be seeing in your garden and ways that I might be able to help. My name is Dory Cooper. I'm the School Programs Manager at the Wylde Center. And so I support schools throughout Metro Atlanta and nationwide when folks reach out to us to help support their school gardens and growing, connecting to curriculum, and just feeling more comfortable bringing students out there. So the Wylde Center has been providing hands-on education throughout Metro Atlanta since 1997. And we do that in 3 ways. We offer field trips to our 5 green spaces. We do school garden visits where we go into schools to work with students in their gardens. And then we offer trainings for teachers and school garden coordinators like this monthly webinar. And then we also host quarterly in-person trainings. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about welcoming back to your school garden, what it looks like now, and what you can do to get it where you want it. So in today's webinar, you're welcome to jump in at any point. You can write messages in the chat or unmute yourself and ask questions. And this recording will be shared with everyone who signed up for the webinar. So this is a photo that I took in about April of a school garden nearby. And this is what it looked like when I left, right? And so I think some of you may have a similar experience where your garden was early spring. I planted some greens here. It looks like I also planted some peas. There wasn't much overgrowth. And then when you come back, it might look completely different, right? So that can be really overwhelming when it looks just totally overgrown or totally dead and you're not sure what to do. So the first thing I would recommend doing is just go out to your garden with an open mind and take a look and see what needs to be done to your garden. And you might not know what needs to be done yet, and we'll talk through that, but go out there with your phone or a piece of paper and just look at your garden space to see what has done well, what has grown really well, what is totally dead and needs to be taken out. Maybe your structures are falling apart. Maybe you know that you want completely empty beds for the start of the school year so that you can plant. So I would recommend making that list of what needs to be done. And so here's an example. This is one of our garden beds here at our Oakhurst Garden. This is a bed that I had been caring for, and then I went on vacation for 2.5 weeks and came back and it was quite overgrown. So if I were walking out to my garden and seeing this, what I would first look at are the dead things. It's usually where the eye goes, right? So I can see, it's a little hard to see these green, but I can see these cherry tomatoes here are pretty much died back. So I would just take a look at them, see if they're worth saving. I know they're not from seeing them in person. So my step 1 would be removing the cherry tomatoes. There's a few other plants that look a little dead. These squash have yellow leaves. So I would just take a look and see how my squash plant is doing. Is it producing? Is it not producing and just taking up space? And then you can either cut that back or leave it in or take it out completely. I also know that this structure here, our beanpole tunnel, looks like it's really falling apart. So I would add that to my list of things that I need to do too, is redo or reinforce my bean structure. But then I see I've got some okra back here that's looking good. These tomatoes are still looking okay. So that's what I would do, is go through your garden and just take some time to look at what needs to be done. And with an open mind, don't be too hard on yourself or, feel like it's overwhelming. So then once you've figured out, you've taken a look, you've assessed, go ahead and harvest anything you can. A lot of these things have probably been out there for a little while with no one harvesting. So go ahead and harvest those tomatoes, cut some flowers, herbs, greens. Use it while you can. And I know that we plant these gardens so that we can share these with kids and students. But until you're ready to do that, it might be better to just do that first harvest for yourself or share it with your other staff. And then you'll be able to plan to be able to use the others with students. But if you leave things sitting out there a little long, then no one will be able to enjoy them. So an example of that, this is at Westchester Elementary School. I took this picture at the open house on July 31st. And so this is another example of what you may see. Amazingly, they had 3 massive pumpkins out there, which I was really excited to see. But you can also maybe see that the plant that the pumpkin is attached to is completely dead. And so we really need to harvest those as soon as possible, because if we leave those pumpkins sitting out there, they'll just rot and then we won't be able to utilize them. In this garden, we have a lot of beautiful flowers as well. So I would go through and just do a little harvest of some of those flowers, make a bouquet, trim them back a little. They're taking over the bed. So, cutting them back, making room for other plants. And then I also see that they've got some dying squash here. So I would take those out and make room for some late summer, early spring planting. I think something when we talk about cutting back plants, it can be it can feel a little wrong, like with these zinnias, for example. They are really pretty and they're doing really well. And so it can be a little hard to cut back a third or half of that plant. But the best thing to do is make room to be able to grow other things. And so you can still keep them, but I would recommend cutting back a little bit. And that goes into our third step. Is deciding what will stay and what will be taken out. So that was sort of what I was talking about, is remove those dead plants, cut back plants that have totally taken over, and removing weeds. And so this is where you think about, what do I want to plant this fall and late summer? How much space do I need? Maybe you do just want to leave these zinnias to do their thing, and that becomes a pollinator garden. So you can think about that when you're making your list of things that need to be done. What do you hope to plant? Now, if this bed was going to become an okra patch, and that was my plan, and that's what I want, then you're going to have to clear out almost all of that and start those okra seeds as soon as possible. But if you just want this to be greens or carrots, you can leave some of those bigger plants and the zinnias that are taking up space. So those are some things to consider. Okay, now another question is, what do you do if your beds are just completely overgrown? There's no intentional plants growing there. It's all weeds or plants you can't recognize. So this is an example of that. This is one of our beds in our community garden. You can't even see the garden bed. It's just completely overgrown. So this is fairly common when we return back to school. What I would recommend here is, you can try to see if there's any plants that are salvageable in there, but what I would do is just take it all out. So you can either use like a weed whacker and just weed eat at the base of those plants, or this would be a really good time to consider having a volunteer day. This would be a lot of work for one person to pull all these weeds out, but if you have 5 people, it would be done very quickly. So whenever there's projects that feel like they would take you more than an hour or 2 hours and you'd be out there for a long time, I would recommend just organizing a volunteer day. We usually host these at a lot of our schools. Well, we work with our schools to host these once a season, we like to say. And you can reach out to parents, other teachers. You can choose a day after school where you all meet in the garden for an hour, or you could choose a weekend as well. And once you've got that list of things that need to be done and you're just pulling out weeds, it shouldn't take long to get your gardens back up and running. but it makes it a lot easier when you have extra hands. And then the opposite situation happens a lot too when we return to school is, what do you do when your beds are completely dried up and all of the vegetation is dead? Then you're kind of in luck because you can skip the volunteer day, the weeding, the worrying about what to take out, and you just have a fresh start. So you'll just skip straight to amending the soil, which is our fourth step. It's always a good idea at the start of a season, especially one like late summer where your spring and summer veggies have sucked a lot of nutrients out of your garden. It's a great idea to go ahead and amend your soil if you can. So this is the part where school gardens I see tend to have trouble with amending soil because this is often the most costly part of having a school garden. So I recommend this time of year adding a new layer of soil to fill those garden beds back up to the top, and then also a layer of compost. So sourcing that soil can be an expense. And so that's a time to, if you have access to it, leaning on your PTA, looking for grants. The Decatur Farm to School Committee currently has micro grants up to $500. And that's going to be implemented pretty soon. So I think the deadline is September 22nd. And then we'll find out shortly after that if you've received it. So looking for small grants like that could help, and even reaching out to hardware stores, asking your local Ace Hardware if they have a few bags to donate or a discount to be able to fill your garden beds and get them growing for the year. And then for compost, I've always recommended Compost Now. They're a great partner because they deliver straight to the school in bags, which makes it really easy. And we may, depending on your situation, we may also be able to provide some compost. So you can reach out to me at the Wylde Center as well. And I want to show you that difference. So this is at Oakhurst Elementary School. This was over the winter I did this, but this is what their gardens were looking like, just totally dried up and dead. You can even see it's kind of sandy soil. And so I wanted to show the difference. This is just, it's not a lot. This was just 2 5-gallon buckets of compost. And I think I had 1 bag of garden soil, and I mixed them together in a wheelbarrow and poured them into the beds. And so adding that healthy soil is going to be really important for having success this fall. It's the perfect time to do it when you're clearing out beds, and then you can just immediately plant right in there. All right, once your beds are prepped, time to plant. This is the fun part, I think. The challenge with this is always sourcing your plants and your seeds. So when you're planning what you're going to plant, I recommend just taking a moment and thinking about what is available to plant, what is in season to plant, and what do I want to show my students or my school community in the garden this year. So there's a few resources you'll want to think about when you do this. You'll want to look at a planting calendar for your zone. Here in Atlanta, we're mostly zone 7B. You'll want to find the zone 7B planting calendar. I also recommend looking at the harvest of the month calendar to see if there's anything that you want to start planting now to use later. For example, October is Georgia Organics Farm to School month plant. It's Pepper Palooza. So peppers are what we need to have this October. And so you'll definitely want to get your peppers in now. So thinking ahead about what you want and then sourcing it. So right now it is a little tough for school gardens because with the heat, there's not a lot of transplants available at stores, and the ones that are tend to not be so good right now. For example, the Wylde Center, we just started our seeds for the early fall. And so we'll start to see those for sale in about a month or so. And so this time of year, direct sowing, putting seeds in the ground is probably the best way to do it, until those transplants become available, and then you can put those in. It's also, let me skip ahead for a minute. It's also a great time to start seeds in your classroom. A lot of times we think about starting seeds over winter, but you can start them now because it's too hot outside for a lot of those seeds to germinate. So as that weather cools down, you can start these seeds in your classroom and then bring them out to students. And this is also a really good way for students to see the process in their classroom before you go out to the garden. So I did a seed starting webinar early last year, but I really like starting them in these egg cartons. They're fairly easy to find, or parents can bring in, and then you can, with a lot of the seeds, you can just directly take them out of there. Some you may want to up pot or move into bigger pots. But you can also, I've seen people start seeds in their classroom in plastic cups, small containers. There's all sorts of ways that you can do it. And it's a fun process for the students to see. And so if we back up a little bit, these are some seeds that you can direct sow into your garden. Right now, it's a little hot right now, so they may not all germinate. So you may need to do a second planting in a few weeks. And so I would recommend getting some okra into your garden. You can plant onion seeds, radishes, squash. Maybe you could do summer squash. You could also start doing some more fall squash, like butternut squash. It's a great time to still plant marigolds and zinnias, get those flowers in there. And then also some of your greens, your kale, spinach, collards, beets, carrots. Of course, trying some basil would be a good idea. It grows quickly. And so all of these things you can plant throughout the fall. You can plant some now to see if they'll germinate, or you can plant some in about a month and they'll definitely start germinating. So those are my recommendations. And a lot of these are great for kids because some of these they can eat right away, like the kale, the spinach, radishes, and then others like beets and carrots are really cool for the students to see them growing underground, pull it out. It's a lot of fun. And the okra, of course, is a really great plant. It grows really tall and has beautiful flowers. And so my biggest tip that I mentioned earlier is hosting a garden volunteer day or cleanup day, excuse me. The start of the school year, everyone's a little excited and wanting to get involved. And so it's a great time to do it. Same with the spring. The spring, everyone's excited about the warm weather and the idea about having a garden. And so they tend to be motivated to help out. So like I said, we usually send the invitation. We work with schools to send an invitation to staff and parents through newsletters or whatever form of communication the school already uses. It's also a great idea to recruit for a school garden committee. So we did this at the open houses we attended for each school. We made a sign-up list for anyone who's interested in joining the school garden committee. And that just means that they're available to call on if you need help, so that you have a list of names you can email and say, hey, I'd like to clean up the garden so that we can start planting. Here's the date and time. It should only take an hour. And you really can accomplish a lot in an hour with a group of people. So something else to think about right now too is the maintenance plan for the garden. So who's going to be the one caring for the garden? Who's going to be utilizing the garden? What classes will come out there? Will parents be involved? Just start thinking about this and having those conversations now. The things to think about are water. Who's going to water and when? Is there access to water? And if the answer is no, it's still okay. I've said this before. Obviously gardens need water, but I have seen a lot of resilient plants at schools where they have no access to water. So don't let that deter you too much, but think about that. Who will water? How will we do it? When will we do it? How often? Same with weeding and maintaining. How often will we go out there? When will we go out there? And who's deciding what you're going to plant? Is there one teacher? Is that you who's deciding, making the plan for the garden? Are there classroom teachers who also want to decide what will be planted? Does the cafeteria staff want to be involved in school nutrition in what's planted? Science teachers? Start thinking about that and maybe make a list of who you want to talk to. And then, of course, how can you utilize parents, community volunteers, classrooms to make that garden plan come to fruition? So I am always happy to answer any questions you have about school gardens. We also offer a 30-minute consultation for free to come out to your school and see what you're working with and give our recommendations. I know it can be a little bit overwhelming this time of year. There's a lot going on and a lot to get ready for with your schools. And so I just hope that your school garden is not an added piece of stress, that it is manageable and doable. So always feel free to reach out to me. My email address is there, and you should receive it when I send out this recording. But I hope that y'all are having an excellent start of your school year and excited about the potential for your gardens. And so now I can open it up for any questions or ideas or concerns, and I'll stop this screen recording here.